All right. So as we welcome our folks, I'll get started, and then we can we can then proceed forward. So first, what a great conference it's been so far. We're very excited that people could keep logging in and joining us at all different parts during our We Represent conference. So thank you to the organizers for giving space for all of us to be here and engage in great dialogue. This session is one of a couple concurrent sessions, and specifically, this session is focused on choosing the program and country right for you, really looking at the opportunities that are available as we look at Africa and Middle East. And so that will be our specialty and will be our focus, and really thrilled about the backgrounds of the panelists and their experiences that they can share with everyone here too. A couple logistics. We have our Q&A down at the bottom. So as you have questions, please add it to that. We also have our chat. So for some reason, your Q&A does not function, just add it right to that, and we'll make sure to grab it there as well. We definitely want to use this as Q&A time. And so I might have a couple, but really want to get it from the audience, and so I do appreciate that. So we'll get underway. So as we go through here, actually, first, we will go by alphabetical order by first name, if that sounds okay with everyone. Maybe going to sort of flip the script a little bit. And so Anisa, the pressure's on you. And so Anisa, if you could just sort of introduce yourself and a little bit about your background, and then we'll continue on to the other three, and then we'll come back to our group here. So Anisa, thank you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Anisa Rahaman, and I currently am a Peace Corps employee at the Peace Corps headquarters in Washington, D.C. I am quarantining in my hometown of St. Louis, Missouri with my family, but I still have my nice DC spot waiting with bated breath for when COVID is over and we can, resume some sense of normalcy. So I've been working at the Peace Corps for about 4.5 years. And prior to joining Peace Corps, I was not a Peace Corps volunteer, but I was fortunate enough to study abroad through the Gilman Award. I studied abroad in Jordan in the summer of 2016. So I'll be talking about my experience picking my program in the Middle East. My program was focused on language intensive instruction, and it also had an internship component. So I was fortunate enough to participate in an internship with a refugee trauma center. Since I was there in 2016, those of you who are interested in Middle East studies, I'm sure know that that was during the height of the Syrian refugee crisis. And so it was a really unique time to be in Jordan because so much history was happening actively while we were in the country. And no one knew how to guide us through it because it was new to them as well. Jordan has a huge history of refugee migration, but this was an unprecedented situation. So I was able to take that challenging time and make it something that was a phenomenal learning experience. And I'm excited to speak to all of you about that. A little bit more about my background. I went to American University. I graduated in 2017 with my bachelor's in international relations, and I minored in business, nonprofit, leadership, and management. And my job at Peace Corps now, I'm fortunate enough to be able to actually use my degree in exactly what I do now, is I work in IR at the Peace Corps, and I do business operations for our IT department. I make sure that all of the IT network equipment we use in all 65 countries is running smoothly. So whenever volunteers get to come back, they can access the internet. So that's a little bit about me, and I will pass it off to Jasmine.
Yes, hello. My name is Jasmine Whaley. I'm located in Greensboro, North Carolina, born and raised in North Carolina. And I also went to school here at Elon University. I went to undergrad at Elon. I have a bachelor's in political science and a bachelor's in international studies. My focus at Elon was Middle Eastern politics, culture, and religion. So that was what I studied while I was in Jordan. I was also fortunate enough to get the Gilman Scholarship to go to Jordan. And that was, yeah, and that was in spring of 2012. It was just an absolutely phenomenal experience while I was there. We got to go and see so many, just, things are so old in other places, like so many archaeological digs and mosques that are like thousands of years old. Like I barely comprehend, but it was really, really incredible. And I also got the opportunity to go to Palestine, to the West Bank, as well as to Israel. So that was absolutely phenomenal. I'll tell y'all more about that later. Currently, I'm a political organizer. And so I also got to use my degree, and I've been working in politics and community organizing and community engagement since I graduated. And then Katey, off to you.
All right. Well, it's truly a pleasure to be here. My name is Katey Redmond. I go by she, her pronouns. We all have our bios, so I'm just going to skim mine. I am a global health professional currently working domestically on the COVID-19 pandemic response for the state of Alaska. So I'm trying to make sure that people with disabilities are included in health equity and inclusion efforts, and making sure people have equitable access to the vaccine, testing, and emergency preparedness. So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Fort Lewis College, beautiful public liberal arts college in Durango, Colorado. And then that was where I did my first exchange as an ISEP exchange student back in 2013, yeesh, in Botswana, which was life-changing, absolutely changed my life, had me fall head over heels in love with the African continent. Kept going back. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. So one of my jobs, Anisa, was making sure that the volunteer reporting forms were actually usable in South Africa as a monitoring and evaluation champion. So so I was in South Africa. I got an MPH from the University of Arizona, focusing on global health. And I have, and I also worked in Rwanda for my MPH internship. And then most recently, from 2019 to 2020, I was a Fulbright research student in Namibia, looking at community perceptions of tuberculosis until COVID pulled me out in March, almost a year ago to this day. Fingers crossed, I'm a semifinalist to go back and do the research, pandemic pending, and finish that job. There's some applicable things to the pandemic. But other than that, I am from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I absolutely adore the African continent. It always keeps you on your toes, as 54 countries, more than any other continent in the world, and just always has a new learning experience. So truly grateful for those of you who are even considering it. It's a really cool place.
Panelists, thank you. What a great representation of countries and different nations that you just sort of shared as part of your own experiences, either as your primary sort of country or nation that you chose, and also even ones that you got exposed to during your travels. So I think that leads to the first question is, what was that approach? So what was that strategy as you then thought about, okay, as I sort of look at the world map and where I could maybe study or travel or work at, how did you then, what was your approach to that selection process? And then maybe any key strategies that you can share with others. And for this one, we'll just go alphabetically to start again. So back to you, Anisa, to start.
Alrighty, so as I mentioned, I studied abroad in Jordan during the summer, and I picked my country through my undergraduate program of study. So my bachelor's was in international relations, but I went to American University. And so then you have a focus within that, which is you focus on a region and then you focus on a topic within IR. So my region was Middle East and North Africa. And my topic was peace building and conflict resolution. And I just could not wrap my mind around the idea of studying this in school and reading about how to peace build and resolve conflict and in the Middle East and never been there. So I was like, I gotta go abroad, I gotta do it. And so I knew I had my heart set on that. We only had 2 programs available for study abroad in the Middle East at that time. One was Morocco, the other was Jordan. I knew I wanted to go in the summer because I was a Pell Grant student, I am not ashamed to say. And so I worked full time all the way through my college experience. And so I knew that if I was going to take time away to have no income coming in, it needed to be the smallest amount of time possible. So that's how I picked my summer program. I knew I wanted a program where I could learn Arabic, but I also really wanted to have the experience of working in the country. We're on a student visa, so you can't do paid work, but I wanted something that had a program built in that facilitated you seeking out work. So when I found CET, which is the program I went through, they had the internship and the language component. And I was like, this is it. This is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. It's what I'm looking for. And so that's how I picked my program and my country. And for me, the internship was the greatest experience. It was the most important piece of my time abroad, because having an internship built in then facilitated me to actually go on LinkedIn. And I was like, I need to find more ways to volunteer while I'm here in the country. And I picked up 2 other opportunities. So I ended up with actually like 3 roles while I was in Jordan that summer, so I could make the most of that time. And that's how I came to those decisions.
Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So my decision was like really, really easy and straightforward. I read a lot as a child. And so my parents bought this encyclopedia set. One day I was just flipping through the letter E and landed on the Eiffel Tower in ancient Egypt. And I was like absolutely blown away. Like it was the first time I'd ever heard of a polytheistic religion. I didn't know that's what it was at the time. I was like, how do you invite dentistry in the number zero? Like I did not understand. So I've been fascinated with the Middle East like my entire life. And then I was in fifth grade when 9/11 happened. And I remember being like going home that day and having arguments with my dad at the kitchen table about state sovereignty. Like, so I've always been in this mode of politics in the Middle East. And so I chose my undergrad university, Elon University, specifically on the strength of its study abroad program. It was the only university that I applied to because it was the only one that I wanted to go to. I applied early decision, got the scholarship, and I was like, that's the end of that. And it was because on our tour, I remember the moment too, walking, I remember the moment. Our tour guide was like, Elon has one of the strongest study abroad programs in the nation, but they also have one of the only programs that will allow you to design your own program. And at the time, it was right. It was it was a lot more difficult to find programs in the Middle East because of the time frame, right? 2010, 2012, 2009 was the Great Recession, right? It was just a difficult time. And so I knew what I wanted to do. Like I was committed. I'd gone and spoken to people who were in the Arabic Studies program and in the Middle East department. And they were like, when you get to Egypt, because I originally, obviously Egypt, I was going to go to Cairo. And they were like, make sure you look up Muhammad. Like I had a list of people. And then the Arab Spring ended up happening. And everyone in Cairo was evacuated to Turkey, Israel, or Jordan. So those are three options that we had. And Jordan was culturally, it was the closest option. And I was studying Arabic at the time. And I was studying what was essentially the like Levantine dialect. So I was like, I'm gonna get as close to Israel as humanly possible. And that's how I decided. It was a lifelong dream for me from beginning to end. And a really, really cool component of my program was the cultural immersion component. And that was all of my study abroad experiences. I did a volunteer experience in Morocco, I think a year or two before. That also was very, very culturally immersive. And I got to see so many things. A large part of my program was traveling, and it was just like sitting and talking to other people. And I think you can already tell I love to talk. So that was a really, really great trip for me.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah. I couldn't help make the connection between also the choice of the name of the choice of your school and its first letter from the story you just shared. But I think it just sort of speaks with the E, but I also just think it just sort of speaks to, there can be a lot of deep thought and analysis that goes to, but also sometimes it just sort of just what happens. But Katey, what's your story? You know, what was your strategy and your approach?
Y'all, I'm having so much fun listening to these two. I also was in grade school. I'm probably might be the youngest one on this panel. And fourth grade when 9/11 happened. So I'm talking to y'all from Albuquerque, if I got to mention that in my intro. So I grew up in Albuquerque, though, born in North Carolina. Parents are from North Carolina. And we actually had family friends from NC State that the dad was Palestinian and the mother was Egyptian. So I just grew up with all these different cultures. And just being aware of how being culturally insensitive and how things happened in 9/11, being completely apolitical and not really getting to know where the countries were coming from. So that's always just motivated my career. It's like, okay, other generations have not been great, have been ugly Americans. What can I do to kind of make this better? So that background, and my autistic fixation has always been geography, culture, and history, but I never thought that I could go abroad. So in college, I was part of a service group, which was called Village Aid Project. And we built water and sanitation systems in Ecuador and Nicaragua. And I did 2 summers in Ecuador. And even though my Spanish remains an embarrassment to this day, I loved it. I absolutely loved working on the community. I loved being owned that the community was better at construction than I was and not being the expert. And I'm just really fortunate that that was my first experience working abroad, was that sustainability, letting the community be the expert, was just a really healthy, progressive way of looking at it. But I was initially going to go to Växjö, Sweden, and I don't want to go too much more into the disability talk because Jasmine and I already been there, done that. But when you have a disability, you're kind of pushed into going to countries that are like Europe, Australia, New Zealand, if you have enough money to go to Australia, New Zealand, like some of the Asian countries, which, if that's absolutely fine. But I felt like that was the only option for me. And so I started looking on the ISEP website of what had psychology and what had public health, which was my minor. Because in the end, I had to study abroad to finish my degree. So I had to get some course credit out of this. And the first one that came up was Botswana. Now, I've also been an anti-bias facilitator since my freshman year of college. So I would do workshops teaching people about prejudice and bias and privilege. And so I got owned because I did the search on the ISEP website 5 times, and Botswana was the first to come up with the list. Is like, I can't go to Botswana. Autistic girl from Albuquerque is not going to do Botswana. And I had to really question myself and say, why are you so scared to go to Botswana? And in the end, it was my American bias of how dangerous Africa, which is not a country, was. And so I was like, okay, you know what? If I like Ecuador so much, I'm going to have to do this. If Ecuador went well, you got to give Botswana a shot. And so I went to my study abroad advisor, told her, guess what? We're going to try and get an autistic in Botswana. And she automatically talked to the ISEP head of African programs. They really made this case. And Botswana graciously gave me an exchange, and the rest is history. I keep being drawn to that continent ever since. And then real quick for Namibia, and if people have looked at the Fulbright things, like the Fulbright, how people signed up for Fulbright, PubMed is a really awesome resource in public health. It is free databases for NIH or even just using Google. And if you want to do a research project, you basically look up who's doing what research in what country. I knew I wanted to do tuberculosis because that was a neglected area of my Peace Corps service. And I thought I was working in Rwanda when I was applying, and I thought that I would do Rwanda, but my French remains embarrassing. And they didn't really have a lot of psychosocial community level work on TB perceptions, which is what I wanted to do. Most of it is very medical. And so I actually had a friend on Instagram from college. Her friend was talking about her friend doing pre-service training for Peace Corps in Namibia. And Namibia has always been the country that's has gone away. Like, as a New Mexican, I love the desert. Germans in a desert just fascinates me. And I was this close to Namibia. So quick geography lesson. South Africa is at the bottom of Africa, right? Straight up north is Namibia, Botswana, sorry, it's landlocked. And then up on the Atlantic coast is Namibia. And it's the second least densely populated country in the world. It's huge. But there's a little strip on top of it. And when I was on safari in Botswana, I was this close to Namibia. And I had a trip planned to Namibia, and the girls ghosted me that we're going to do this. They went to Zimbabwe instead. So the running joke with my friends was, you're going to have to work in Namibia. And sure enough, there was a professor at University of Namibia doing the research that I wanted. I cold emailed her, and she actually took it. We got a proposal together, and Fulbright took it. And I'm still shocked about that 2 years later. But I also talk too much, so I will yield.
Thank you all. So actually, Katey, believe it or not, I'm going to go back to you, and we can sort of go in reverse order, because I think we got a picture about sort of this country selection, but it's not just a country, it's also the program that is being chosen. So you mentioned ISEP, so for you, maybe what took, what was more important to you, and then specifically, maybe why that particular program, what kind of insight can you share with our listeners here, as program selection, what was maybe that top criteria that you were looking for?
Yeah, I may not be the best one to answer this question, but it was options. So Botswana was the one country that could go to. I did not have the money to do a provider like CIEE. So what was nice about ISEP, it's a network of, I think it's 300 universities in 50 countries across the world. And any participant in an ISEP program, they can send students abroad. So they were able to send 3 students from Botswana to colleges in the United States, no matter where they were, because they were participants in the ISEP program. And so they had 2 exchange positions that were open nationwide for American students or ISEP students from those countries. So that was the big thing. I was very naive walking into study abroad. Like, I still just didn't think it was a really surreal experience, but it turned out to be a really good fit. And again, I mentioned this briefly in the disability one. ISEP is very much a DIY your own experience because it's less expensive. There are less supports. You know, when things happened, we leaned on the other exchange students, and we just happened to have, unfortunately, our ISEP coordinator was hospitalized for most of the year. But it turned out to be really good occupational therapy because I had to learn how to stick on my feet. I had to learn how to problem solve, and it was so empowering to be able to do those things. And those are skills I still use today. I like wherever I am in the world, how do you jump about things? You know, you can't just have a meltdown. And I think like my anxiety really dissipated. And also just the chance to learn the other language, like being able to know Setswana and speak Setswana and be exposed to a Bantu language, which is, those languages are so cool. Like they construct concepts based on things that make sense in their cultural context. So, but I think that was the big thing for me, Matt, was I wanted to go to a place that most people in New Mexico did not know or didn't know what was on a map. And so I could kind of expand that horizon. And so the way to go to Botswana was through ISEP. And I was actually the first from Fort Lewis to study abroad in Botswana through that method. So
that they really sort of pushing your boundaries, and knowing the boundaries are frankly limitless, and just sort of how far and where do you want to go with that. So
and they let me go. That was the other thing.
There you go. Right.
I didn't freak out.
I think that's a key message, that last point about just showing the confidence that you are a right applicant for that program. Jasmine, for you, you know, as you were looking at programs, you know, how important was that in your criteria, you know, for your selection? I guess which programs, and maybe, you know, how important was it in your decision making about the program? Excuse me.
Right. So I'm trying to figure out the best way to phrase this one. I went to CIEE with Elon University, and I could not have cared less. Like, I'm not gonna lie. It was because it was an established university program, so I didn't need to go the ISEP route. Like, so it was already there for me. But at the same time, I was hell-bent and determined to get as close to Egypt and as possible. I was like, I'm going to go see pyramids. I'm gonna go see some pharaohs. I'm gonna look at the stars. I'm gonna go look at the Nile and drink tea. I had all of these plans. And that was really what I wanted more out of a program, was the option to just experience things. And so I found that Elon, that's a really big component of their study abroad programs, is like language immersion. And then it's not so much, at least for political science in my specific program, it's not so much about the curriculum as it is about learning the language and like the political context of the culture. And so those were the two really big focuses of my program. And again, it could not have worked out better because that was the focus. Our professors were so cool and they were so down for us just doing things. So I got, I'm gonna tell a story really quickly. I said that I got the opportunity to go to the West Bank and to Israel. We went to Israel on spring break, so that was just dope. But the reason that we got to go to the West Bank was because I actually ended up getting sick, and I called the nurse on our program, Karima. Katey's heard about Karima. It's absolutely amazing. We're still friends to this day. And we sat down in a coffee shop, and we maybe talked about the medical stuff for like 20, 30 minutes. And then we spent 3 hours just talking, and it come to find out her father was the Palestinian ambassador to the UN during the Nakba, which blew my mind. So she was like, and I was telling her, it was like a month, 2 weeks before finals. I was like, can't believe I didn't get to go to the West Bank. And she said, I mean, if you want to go, then I can help you. So, like, stop playing with me, Karima. You can't tell me these things. And then she ended up arranging a meeting for us in Amman with the mayor of Jericho, who then personally invited us to go, and he arranged a diplomatic tour of the West Bank. So like our program had so much fluidity, and like my professors were like, get out of here. Go, 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 which was really encouraging. So again, people just let me do it, which was incredible. And they were super willing to also, like, you know, come back and take your tests, but go off and have fun. So I think I got everything that I wanted out of my program. But again, I was very, very intentional about choosing the school and the specific department, the degree, and the study abroad program. So Elon, you have to study abroad for a semester to get the international studies degree. Yeah.
Great perspective. Katey, and I know you mentioned Fulbright. Can you just maybe elaborate on that? And then we'll go to Anisa with that same question there.
Yes, thanks, Anisa, for letting me cover this. One other thing about Fulbright, in terms of Namibia, it was really, really helpful to have that title and that background. So Namibia has a very high unemployment rate. It is very tough to get a visa to Namibia. And just having access to the embassy, that being introduced to the embassy, having lunch with the ambassador, which was moving on up. I didn't know who the ambassador was when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in South Africa. But like that was really helpful for UNAM to make the case for a visa. So for a lot of countries, that was the only way to do that. And because I just knew how to live abroad by myself, like the cost of living was really, really good and manageable with the Fulbright grant. So thank you, Anisa.
Great, Anisa. So your story, which program or programs did you look at? And then how important was that to you in your selection process?
Yeah, I think that's how I started my initial question, that's how I chose my country, and that's how I chose my program all in the same breath, which was that I wanted to make sure that I had enough time to be able to earn enough credits to go into my senior year. I needed to make sure I had enough time to carve out of my schedule because I was a student who worked full time, in my undergraduate. And so, like I said, if I was going to take time off from being able to work a 40-hour week and take class, then it needed to be as small amount of time as possible because I was like, I'm a graduate and I need to have some money stacked up. DC is very expensive, honey. So I had to get myself together. I was going into my senior year when I was finished with my Gilman and being abroad. And so, the experience that I had and the experience that I was envisioning I was going to have my junior year when I was applying, I kept thinking like, okay, I'm going to go abroad. And when I get back, I'm going to start my senior year. And then I will have had international experience on my resume when I'm applying for my first job out of college. And that was a really big deal to me. Like, I love hearing Jasmine and Katey's, personal anecdotes and how you had like this mission, this feeling. I love to hear that because for me, most of my college experience, I didn't really feel like such a personal movement toward it. I felt like it was more of a business strategy. It was, I need to get this degree so I can get this job, so I can get this pay grade, so I can get this check, so I can live this life. That's the way I thought about a lot of things and a lot of decisions that I made. Part of that is going to a school like American University in DC, which is like one of the top 10 programs in IR in the world. And so I was competing in class for these grades with people who had studied abroad their whole life. They were doing mission work in high school. They were taking gap years between high school and freshman year so that they could be in another country and already have cultural immersion, have learned another language, have had volunteer experience where they weren't worried about making money. They were planning to intern at the UN after senior year because it was unpaid and they wanted the experience. And I would have loved to be at the UN, but I was like, who's gonna pay for these rice and beans? Like, I have to do something to get this money together. So for me, picking my study abroad program, picking the term, picking the country, I looked at it from a very strategic lens. What am I studying? What are my passions? What do I want to do next? And for me, I knew I wanted to study international relations. And so I did at the best. And I knew I wanted to then translate that into a career working in IR and having the international experience of being in the Middle East, learning a critical needs language. Shout out to the Gilman for that language scholarship that they tacked onto my award. Being able to have that language experience. And then on top of it, inadvertently being there at such a volatile and in a lot of ways scary and challenging time, it prepared me so much for working in an IR field where even though I work in a headquarters building now, I also work as a crisis intervention hotline person for Peace Corps volunteers who are in the field. When they're calling and something's happening wrong in another country, whether it's someone like Katey, who is in, Botswana or in Namibia, or, even if it was someone, Jasmine, maybe back when we had, Peace Corps Egypt or Cairo, if you had an emergency after hours, you're calling me. And I know I can handle that call. And I know that in my next career move, I can always say, I went abroad, I learned another language, I work in IR, and when I put my resume on the table, I know I am at least as good as everyone else who might have had a leg up before we even got to the interview. So to me, that was how I ultimately chose.
Awesome. I know, Jasmine, you had some a Gilman experience as well. So maybe can you share a little bit more about the language grant specifically?
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that, Anissa, because this was actually one of the most important parts of my application, was that critical language, like getting them. Let me explain how important this is. So language classes are extremely expensive, and I cannot overemphasize that. Going abroad, this will be the best opportunity you ever get to practice your language. Cultural immersion is a thing. I went from not being able to speak words to being able to speak entire sentences and have conversations. It helps a ton. And I was able to do all of those things because of the grant that Gilman gave me. I was taking Arabic classes as a part of my university, but then I was also able to like get a tutor, right, for that more one-on-one interaction. When I studied abroad in Berlin, in Germany, to get my master's degree, I have a master's in public policy. I got a scholarship. It did not include a language grant. And so my Arabic is actually still better than my German, even though I spent half a semester in Jordan and 2.5 years in Germany, because I had someone to pay for those classes. That was a really big part. I also worked full-time throughout college and grad school, and it's hard. You can't juggle all of those balls at the same time. It's impossible. I tried. It's not a good idea. Don't do it. And so if you are going to a critical needs, if you're going somewhere where we need that language and you can apply, please, please, please apply for it. Like, I don't know how often you will get this opportunity to learn that language in that way.
Jasmine, thanks for uplifting and sharing that there. So, so now that we've heard
We
about
can't hear you, Matt.
Thank you. Can you get again good now? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you for uplifting that about sort of the grant scholarships. And also I think something to reemphasize about, spend time looking at the programs versus just some great opportunities. And I think the panelists, this might speak to the question that I now have is, now that you've gone through this and you have the chance to sort of be reflective and look back, you sort of lessons learned, hindsight is 2020. If there's anything that you would maybe do different, or maybe that you either, whether it's a different selection or just sort of that lesson learned that you think is really great and critical to share with our audience, what may that be? And maybe Anisa, I'll go back to you. So we'll go back to an alphabetical order. So what comes to your mind, as you look back and if you had to do things over again or do things a little bit differently, what might that be?
That's a great question. And spoiler alert to all of our audience members, we got the questions beforehand, and I was stumped when I read this question. I think I'm still a little stumped now, because when I think about my experience studying abroad, I know that I picked the right country at the right time for me, for my career, for my academics, for my life. I know I was supposed to be in that country at that time during so much turmoil, during so many challenges, so that it could prepare me for what IR work looks like in real time, and not just working in your think tank or working in your, you're getting your research published. It's really, there's this whole other lens to IR that's not this sense of the pictures on Instagram of everybody smiling, in the desert with the pyramids behind them. It's like, yeah, that's great. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's joyous. But you might then go back to your campus and people are shooting. Like, this is real life, and I mean, you don't even have to leave the country for that to happen. There's plenty of places in the United States where you're going to campus and you're walking home and people are getting robbed, So to me, I think that I definitely, looking back on it, I would have definitely done the same thing at the same time. Something I would have changed, though, is I would have reached out to the programs that I studied abroad through, which was CET, and I would have asked them for more resources for students of color studying abroad in Jordan, particularly for Black students. Myself and 4 other students, we were the first Black students that the University of Jordan had through CET at that time. I only studied abroad in 2016. This was not that long ago, people. And we were told, we've never had a cohort that had Black students through our specific program. So we don't really know how to help you. And so on my way to school every morning, the Black students, we all walked together so that we had a little strength in numbers, and people used to call us slaves in Arabic. There were times where we got bottles thrown at us as a woman. There were times where we were groped when people were trying to take pictures with us. And so there are definitely a lot of challenges when it comes to studying abroad in another culture, particularly when you bring an identity that people might not resonate with as American or as able-bodied or as an English speaker. You know, myself, I, for some reason in Jordan, was Black Arab passing. And so I was constantly accused of being Sudanese when I was there. And by the time I left, I was like claiming it. I was like, that's right. I am from Sudan, even though I'm not. I'm Black, but I'm from America. And I was like, no, I am from Sudan. That's right. You better give my people my rights. And I didn't even know what I was talking about. But it was because I've had the experience of dealing with a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice, and a lot of additional challenges that folks in my white cohort did not experience the same way. I had a joke, you know, with my other students where I was like, if I didn't want to get cabs, I could have stayed in DC. You know, that's something I could have done here. Why am I going to another country without air conditioning to have this experience? But ultimately, it was the most important experience of my life to know that no matter where you go, you bring yourself with you. You have to make sure you advocate for yourself. You have to make sure that you're an ally for other people when you do have privilege. And you have to never be afraid to ask for help from other people so they can provide you a resource. Many people just don't know what you're experiencing, and they will help you if you ask. So for me, and my advice that I would give to other people is be sure to be in touch with what your identity is, particularly if it's underrepresented, which I think all of you engaging with this are in order to qualify for Gilman or Fulbright or Boren. Make sure that you talk to your program about what kind of resources they have, because you don't want to be in a country where they're like, well, we don't know what to tell you. You're on your own. You want to make sure people are there to support you and have your back and know what to do. And if they don't know what to do, that they'll tell you how to figure it out. That would be the thing I would do. And that's what I encourage you to do as well.
These are rich. Thank you. I mean, this speaks to so much. And I think not only that, ask, you know, raise your voice. And again, I think spotlighting the group is here because it's about finding those opportunities that you deserve to have and make sure that you're asking for it, because you're here because there's a desire to broaden horizons and connect people and create great global communities. Jasmine, you know, same question, you know, sort of the hindsight 2020, as you said, to look back, you know, what might be something, if you had to do it again, you know, a different approach, different decisions, share with the group here.
I would have saved more money before I left. So there is that. And I say that every single time I go abroad. I'm never prepared. I just never am. So I would have done that. Because when I left, I only left with the money that Gilman gave me. Like, that's it. And it was more money than I'd ever seen at one time before. So I was like, do. I went and had a great time. So no, I wouldn't do anything else about my program. I'm so glad and fortunate that I went at the time that I did. And Anisa, this dovetails quite nicely with what you were saying, because I studied around 2012. That's when February 2012 is when Trayvon Martin was shot. And so I got into Jordan, and one of the first conversations I had with my host family, who's Palestinian, was about like Palestinian rights and Black rights. And because Palestine and Black activism, there's a very deep and rich connection there. And my background is in, like, I am now a community organizer. I started organizing my freshman year at Elon. And so this is my orientation. And I didn't realize at the time how cathartic that was. Like, I don't actually know if I would have been able to make it at that time without that support. And I mean, down to the level of my host sister had studied abroad in Washington, D.C. So she already, like, we were vibing on the same length. And like, her friends were so engaged and interested because this was the first time anyone had like heard about this, I suppose, since Rodney King. So like, Jude had friends coming to bars with the Malcolm, like the autobiography of Malcolm X, being like, "You're the only Black person I've ever met. I don't know if I'll ever get this option to do this again." And like, my broken Arabic, their broken English, and Jude, they're translating, and we're having fights like in two different languages. But it was I'd never been pushed like that. I'd never been challenged on both my Blackness, but also my privilege as an American, because that was a really, really difficult thing for me to swallow, was in those discussions. And also when we went to Palestine, we were in the Balata refugee camp, which is the oldest refugee camp in the West Bank from the Nakba. And someone straight up said to me, like, who are you, an American, to be here in this camp asking us questions and asking us for advice? Like, who do you think you are? And that was a really, really difficult thing for me, like a line for me to be able to struggle to like tread at that time, being so hurt as a Black American, but then also still being an American. And, you know, shout out to Jude. She really did not let me stray away from that. And she really like held me to that. And then on the other side, I met my best friend in Jordan. Like the first day we took the same taxi to university every day because we were the only two who lived in our neighborhood. And again, we both only came with the money our program gave us. We needed to conserve. And Steph is white. So Anisa, I never had that problem of not getting a cab until I was trying to go home alone. So I know exactly what you mean. And so that is something to be very, very aware of. But I mean, Stephanie is my best friend. We're still best friends. When I was abroad in Berlin, she studied abroad in France and then again in Geneva. And so I have met the best people ever in my life while in different countries. Yeah, I wouldn't change anything.
Excellent. Thank you. Gosh, rich stories more. Katey, for you, hindsight 2020, you know, anything different? Something maybe you've looked at, a different decision you would have taken. I would love to share, to hear what you shared.
So I'm going to keep this brief because y'all, I know we keep suggesting questions, but we want to hear your questions. We want to hear your input. I'm just saying. So first I have to say, Anisa, I was cracking up because I was just thinking of White Saviors of Tinder, which is like a Tumblr website of the whole pictures and what international relations are. No, I mean, going to Botswana was probably one of the best decisions that I made in my life because it forced me to choose it. It let me know that a career path that was more fulfilling, that better fit my skill set was more possible, which I didn't think of. If I could do it all over again, okay, going off of what Anisa and Jasmine said, my unsolicited advice, if anybody wants to study abroad, learn a language. I don't care. But like UN is terrible about unpaid internships. They also aren't going to consider you if you don't speak 2 other languages. So like, and coming from New Mexico, I know I should speak Spanish, but as somebody with a disability, I wasn't encouraged that. And so now in my late 20s, I'm trying to teach myself French and I'm trying to teach myself Spanish. And that's a lot harder. And if I could go back to college, that would be the one thing that I change, is like trying to minor in a language, trying to go into a language. And so if I did have that language, I probably would have gone to Francophone Africa, like Senegal or Madagascar. I've always wanted to work in West Africa. I've never been able to get my foot in the door with that perspective. But the other thing I've thought of is, since now my interest is more into like climate change, One Health, the intersections between human, environmental, and personal health. In human health, I really would like to do the South Pacific. I think I might do South Pacific just because there's so much lessons learned, or maybe Southeast Asia. So that's what I would say. And then obviously I'm going to say that white privilege, I am not going to claim what it's like to be a person of color, not going to disrespect anybody's validity in that experience. I will say though, especially if you want to study in sub-Saharan Africa, get to know the history of the countries that you're looking at. Because I will tell you, my friends who were Black had dramatically different experiences to what Anisa and Jasmine were saying, compared to Rwanda, compared to post-apartheid South Africa and Namibia, because people are still healing. That conflict, that didn't get over till 1994, which I was born by then. So, we're still trying to figure that out and that process out. And any country with the colonialism and the history, it just behooves you to just know that and walk through that. Like just at least be aware that things like apartheid happened, be aware that a genocide happened, and then let the country define it on its own terms. But I just know so many people that did not know racism existed until they went to South Africa, shamefully, including one person from St. Louis that I did Peace Corps with. So we're not gonna go there, but I know that me just sitting down and listening and being present and acknowledging the privilege was what made a huge difference. Last thing I will say, and I think because each of us have a marginalized identity, I live with a disability, and Anisa and Jasmine have talked about their own experiences. It was really challenging with classism, especially getting a Fulbright, because people automatically assume that I won a grant and I knew an expert. And so my professor, who was colored, which is an identity in Southern Africa, I'm not trying to be derogatory, that was how she identified it as a race, that she had a PhD, and I've been rejected from 3 PhD programs, and she thought that I knew more because I had this Fulbright. And I think that's the other piece to realize is all of us in these countries have sorry, I know I'm wrapping up. All of us in these countries are we are going to have more privilege just by the means of being able to study abroad and have a Fulbright compared to a lot of the other students, which is why I was really humble and I really tried to integrate in my community. And I think that's why I had a really positive experience, but I rambled on long enough. But yeah, just some food for thought.
I'm so glad we had that question so we could just really hear each of your voices and also uplift, I think, the voices of others that also need to be heard. So in our final sort of seconds of our panel here, just sort of last final closing thoughts, and we'll go from Jasmine to Katey to Anisa. So Jasmine, starting with you, what's the just last sort of key message, final thought that you want to make sure that you share with our group here, our attendees?
Right. So as underrepresented populations who are studying abroad, this is going to be one of the most important and most difficult things that you ever do, because the predominant perception in Jordan was that Americans are white, and down to the point where people did not believe me. They would be like, no, but what part of Africa are you from? I'm from North Carolina. What? Where are your parents from? Where are your grandparents from? So, and it was such a good context for me to have. And so I say go there as like an open cup, be willing to learn things and be willing to understand how other people view you and learn why that's important.
Thank you, Jasmine. Katey.
Yeah, just to really consider countries that are off the beaten track. Like one, yes, if you have a marginalized identity, hold your place. The more people that study abroad, that also sends a message to the countries that we serve that people are accepted. But yes, like there's so many great lessons in sub-Saharan Africa about how to solve problems. And there's things that the United States needs to learn, like that they're doing better than us there. So just consider the countries that scare you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katey. Anisa.
Yes, my advice, and just in case anyone was able to come to the panel yesterday about applying for a Gilman or a Fulbright, my advice is know that you've already earned the right to be there and that you deserve to be there and you're worthy of having the experience that you want to have. And when you don't believe it, find people who cheer for you.
Excellent. Panelists, thank you all. Anisa, Katey, Jasmine, thank you for taking the time to share your personal stories and your experiences. Attendees, thank you for joining us during this We Represent session about Africa and Middle East. Remember to complete the surveys as part of our panel session. So not only do they give us great feedback, it's a great opportunity for you to be, hopefully get some great prizes. And of course, we do have our keynote speaker coming up. So again, all, thank you for taking the time and, put those programs in, put those applications in, and thank you for being a part of this great conference with We Represent. Thank you, everyone.
And find us on LinkedIn, guys. Connect with us. We want to talk to you.
Preach.
Hey.
Just give us a message, though, of who you are, though, so that we know, please.
Oh, I'm not going to shout anything. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.